Today we're exploring not just what's possible, but what's responsible, what's viable, and what's next. We have a scientist, a systems thinker, an entrepreneur, and an industry leader step onto stage, which sounds like the start of a joke, but is actually the perfect recipe for a blue economy conversation. What I love about this panel is that it brings together people who study the ocean, restore the ocean, govern the ocean, and build culturally centred businesses from the ocean. And all four kind of do all four. So first up, we have Angela Williamson, CEO of the Blue Economy CRC, who brings policy, governance and global oceans perspective that helps ambition, love that you're getting your sting already, into coordinated action. Then we have Professor Michael Weir, building marine ventures that take ideas into the market, Dr. Nicholas Hill, who works on restoring and valuing coastal ecosystems, and then Professor David Francis, who studies it through aquaculture science and research. Please welcome them to the stage. More round of applause. Come on, we're going to get excited about the fish. Thank you. Yeah, there we are. We need more of a round of applause. We actually had, I don't know, for those at the end of this day yesterday, had someone make a comment in the chat like, we need more fish people. I was like, righto, come to this session. So I hope those two people, yes, thank you. You're the only woos I've got all the last 2 days. So thank you. Getting us excited. Right. Before we get into, for those that aren't fish focused, I do want to frame, and look, I live in the desert. So, fish are not at the fore of my mind, although I do love a barra. Just to frame the conversation, I do want to kind of reassure you that the blue economy is not about feeling sad. It's actually about making sure that our oceans don't. So to make the distinction between blue economy and when we talk about aquaculture, so blue economy is a broader system of sustainable industries and activities connected to the oceans and coast, from food production and energy to transport, tourism and conservation, whereas aquaculture is quite specifically focusing on the farming of fish, shellfish and seaweed for foods and materials. So for those that are not the fish folk, and if you are the fish folk, you can come and have an argument with me afterwards about my definition. So there we go, just to set the scene of the distinction between the two, because that's really, I guess, the framing of today's conversation. So I'm going to throw to the panel. Where should I start? Might start with Ange at the end. I've got a question for all four of you. If we zoomed out and looked at the global blue economy at 30,000 feet, what excites you most right now and what keeps you awake at night?
Okay, so great question. And as a Blue Economy Cooperative Research Centre, this does keep me up every night and it does also excite me. So I've obviously got the right job, which is fantastic. I think the thing I'm most excited about is repositioning seafood in the context of national security and infrastructure and installations. I think it's an opportunity to look at it not just from an aquaculture or fisheries context and the hows, but reminding everyone about what it's about, which is food. And I think that's something that sometimes falls out of the equation. So I appreciate there's a lot of things that sit behind it, but ultimately we're looking at food, we're looking at jobs, we're looking at some real common aspects there for community. Mm-hmm. What keeps me up at night is a thing that I like to call risk retirement, the need for risk retirement. So I'm a regulatory nerd, and so I'm kept up at night by standards, conditions, new legislation, duplication, and I'm obsessed with the idea of looking to retire risk appropriately so that these companies can create a bigger margin, because aquaculture is heavy CapEx. It's OPEX heavy. You don't want people sweating at those assets. You want them to be able to, continually loop through and continually improve and work to that better tomorrow, betterness.
Michael, excites you, keeps you up at night?
Excites me the prospect of human capital being developed, especially in remote communities, saltwater communities. The opening of what I call equality of access. So there are multiple industries in the blue economy that Indigenous people don't have access to. So it's not about equality of opportunity, but access. If we gain entry into those markets, we can build a middle class in certain communities, and it can actually lift a lot of Indigenous people out of welfare and into the middle class. So that's the most prosperous thing about it. What keeps me up at night? Well, I don't really sleep, so I don't know. I think Nothing really worries me because I can really have confidence in people and the way we're moving as a society. We're looking towards solutions, we're working together, and there's a big challenge ahead of us, but we never steer the course. We keep on moving forward.
Awesome, thank you.
I'm very much along the same lines as you, Michael, I must admit, and I think it's really the people aspects of it, the human dimensions, the inclusivity aspect of it. Inclusive is a big part of the definition of a blue economy, and I think it's fair to say we've made quite a lot of mistakes in the green revolution, right, on land, and there's an opportunity here for us to really learn from those and have a kind of a blank slate with the blue economy as we develop that going forward. So that's a really exciting opportunity, I think, to put community front and center of that and look at what the opportunities are. What keeps me up at night, I think, is climate, ultimately, and the impact of climate on the blue economy and how that we can make it. So speaking to the whole panel today is the risk resilience aspects of that and how we can really build for a future under the context of climate change.
Thanks, Nick. David?
I'd start by saying I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said so far. Zooming out and taking a look back in, I get really excited by how far aquaculture's come in the last 50 years. And for those in the room that aren't as familiar, aquaculture a couple of years back, it has now outpaced our capture fisheries. So there are more fish and seafood items being produced by aquaculture today than there are being fished from the sea. And if we look at that from a sustainability point of view, it's a huge hurdle that's been overcome. Now, what keeps me up at night, but also excites me at the same time, is the challenges that we have ahead of us. And if we look a few years down the track, with the global population expected to hit 9 billion people, it's about how we can continue to grow that industry to feed that number of mouths. There are some challenges there. Climate's been mentioned, a whole host of different sustainability aspects that need to come into play. But they're exciting challenges, and one that I think as a society that we can overcome together.
So then I might just pull a thread from that. So that kind of the lead and lag time between those two factors, where do you see the mismatch between the speed of innovation and the speed of regulational market readiness? Like where?
Good question.
Sorry. Oh, that was... Anyone else want to take a moment? So I guess it's, to your point about the growth that's already happened in aquaculture, but I'm interested in the broader blue economy as well. So where is that most pronounced, that mismatch? What could we do? What are we doing because, as I stated at the beginning, great opportunity, but Jiminy Crickets, there's some things at stake here.
Yeah. I think it would be fair to say that the wheels are well and truly in motion, but we know that we can't just turn the tap on and expect it to run at full speed instantaneously. So if we look to Southeast Asia, the mechanisms are at play. Aquaculture is expanding year on, year out. At the same time, it's needing to innovate, which I think we'll talk about shortly, to overcome the challenges that it faces on a daily basis.
What does that innovation look like then? Or where's the...
Where to start, I guess.
Yeah, where to start, yeah.
Well, if we look at aquaculture more broadly, we're not just talking about a handful of species, we're talking about hundreds of different species which are being cultured. So there's the innovation that's creeping into understanding the biological requirements of these new species to break life cycles, developing new farming technique, whether it's onshore to overcome some of the environmental impacts that aquaculture is facing, or if we look towards offshore aquaculture, which there's a whole host of different technologies at play there, whether it's offshore cage technology or farms which are essentially floating the high seas.
I might throw to someone else around, just to touch on the risks a little bit more. What's a risk that the industry tends to underestimate and one that it tends to overestimate? Who'd like to take a crack at that first? What's one that what do we underestimate and what do we overestimate?
So I think it depends on when you talk about industry. One of the things in aquaculture in Australia is it's a very diverse industry. You have, global multinationals, that teams are bigger than everyone in this room, even if you're just looking at the ops side. So I think that there's not necessarily an overestimation of risk. I think it is because I think they actually then lead the risk stick for the rest of industry. But I would say that some of the more increasing risks or things that are shifting and changing are probably what I'm going to call like corridors of activity, and I'll use marine in a context, which is the connection between your local government approvals and your activities there, to your port activities and your service provision, to the like more state water activity, out to Commonwealth waters, which is my bailiwick. We've got the first aquaculture research trial in Commonwealth waters because there is no regulatory basis at the moment. So this is a demonstration. It is a regulatory sandbox of sorts, and got some salmon in there at the moment. We put in 15,000 and we have 14,486 on our lease at the moment because I count them as much as I can. And we've got some kingfish coming in as well. And so adding in a new species into the mix is really interesting. If you look at kingfish in Australia, there is only one commercial company operating at the moment. There has been others, and market has not always matched. So I think there's a piece there with consumers versus community versus producers versus government. And that lead and lag part you've talked on, sometimes government might jump on a community issue that necessarily isn't a consumer issue, and vice versa. So I think that it just needs to be sort of reset around those risks, so that a commercial understanding of risk versus a government understanding of risk versus a research understanding, community and consumer. I think right now they're not using the same language.
Interesting. Michael, your take? What's a risk that we over or underestimate? Or to Andrew's point, what's the different risk for different industry perspectives of community?
Well, I look at it as a broad. So when you talk about risks, it's always associated to your market. Most of our seafood gets exported, so the market's all overseas. There's not much of a domestic market, but then your market is also linked to people licensing. So in Western Australia, there's a lot of monopolies. You can't be innovative, you can't actually carry risk. You have to try fit in wherever you can, and then you have to follow the market, which is overseas. I think a way forward to actually stabilise and reform it all is to look inward, open up a bit of markets, get a bit more regulation in where it's more competition, and start supplying to our domestic market first, and let us benefit from the local economies of seafood and eventually the blue economy. But there's a big imbalance when it comes to aquaculture and general fishing and what's soon to be the blue economy. Everything's going overseas. If we look inward, it always comes back to that question, who are we doing it for? Are we doing it for Australians? Are we doing it for our next generation? Are we doing it for profit? What are we doing it for? That's where your risk is.
It's interesting, the both of you make 2 points that we discussed on stage next door for the climate panel around more collaboration across jurisdictions, and then how do we balance make that balance between the opportunities of export and, we're an export nation, but also ensuring local security from an economic, you're pointing to an economic point of view more so.
And the biggest risk I see is technology. Technology is autonomous. Once it starts, you cannot turn it off. And that takes away jobs. So you have to build people into the factor before you actually get to that point. Because if you get to that point where technology is becoming that wagon wheel of autonomy, you're going to have a lot of people left behind.
Nick, I'd be interested in your take on, like Michael's point around technology displacing people, whether you've got a reflection on that or not displacing people, but ensuring that we've got both tech and human capacity considered. Yeah.
When I say humans, I'm talking about the bottom end. Like sometimes we can see things ahead, 10 years ahead, and we're very good at innovating Australians, and we have a lot of Aussie spirit, but we don't look backwards and we don't look downwards. And that's where technology is a big risk. And if anyone's in the audience and they're going into it, just consider it. It's not actually you have to do it, but just as long as the thought is there.
And, I've got a bit of a West Australian bias here. We're both from the West Coast, and Michael comes from a beautiful part of the WA coast, which is, just as equally as remote where I live in Kununurra. And so I think, ensuring, and actually I'd be interested in your point around the communities that you work with overseas, around working, with people, and it's like the carrot and the stick, again, a conversation we had earlier. But I'm going to jump slightly, Michael, to Nick, around this notion of technology and kind of the human tech interface. And I'd be interested in your reflection on the point Michael just put, but then also an innovation you've seen that changes the game. a tech
That's a
or
really good
otherwise?
question. Yeah. See,
Or that has changed the game. Cool or has, yeah.
I mean, I hear you entirely on this point about humans because I think it's so important. In Coast 4C, we work with smallholder seaweed farmers to produce, to future-proof the supply of quality and responsible seaweed. And it's humans, the human capital, that knowledge is really what powers the entire thing. And there's a real risk if you take away that knowledge that you lose the ability to actually produce seaweed. It kind of, a lot of, the blue economy is vast, of course, and even within seaweed, there's 12,000 odd species and they all have very different needs. And you look at some of the incredible things that are happening in Australia around Asparagopsis, for example. But that's a red seaweed as well, by the way, and I work with tropical red seaweeds. It's the same sort of kingdom, but they couldn't be more different and with different sorts of needs. So the way we see technology is something about enabling technology to support and enhance effectively what smallholders are already doing, but something that we've got to be very, very careful about. How do we not seek to replace? Because ultimately, there's only so much that tech can do, I think, on that. It can make things more efficient. It can support, particularly where we're talking about, and I think Australia is probably a similar sort of context to this, right? Vast areas, very fragmented landscape. And tech can help to make that landscape a little bit more smaller, help to deal with some of the logistics costs and things like that that can otherwise make it a real challenge. But I do think one area that is interesting to this piece around the kind of looking inwards and the national view versus the international view, I do think there's a risk of trying to focus too much inwards on your own nation. We've got one ocean after all. We all share this one ocean. And I think it's really, really important to look. You have to kind of go local to global in this context and kind of think about the intersection between all of those different things. You've got a regulatory environment in Southeast Asia, as you said, which is way more advanced than here. It makes it so much easier to develop and advance aquaculture, whereas there's no innovation really happening in Southeast Asia. All the innovation and the research capacity and that expertise, Australia is perfectly placed to kind of partner with those nations to really help drive that forwards, that can ultimately, I think, come back and benefit Australia. You've got a big task to develop for example, in the seaweed space, to develop seaweed, because 99% is produced by 5 countries of seaweed is produced by 5 countries in Asia and Southeast Asia. So we'd love to see something being developed here in Australia, but I think that's going to take innovation that probably comes from, like here, we could partner with Southeast Asia, drive that forwards and look at something that comes back and benefits Australia. But it has to be people-centered, I think. Otherwise, we lose the opportunity to learn from the mistakes we made in the green economy.
Brilliant, thank you. And I was listening to you so intently. I'm not sure if I was listening to kind of the previous reflection. Is that kind of that understanding of what you've just described around Southeast Asia, having a more conducive regulatory environment and Australia being the innovative leaders, is that the thing that's changing the game? To come back to that question around what's the tech or innovation that you've seen is changing the game? Recognising that? Or is it something else?
I think it's this ability to use digital tools and digital apps and the reach that they have now into really remote communities. I mean, I used to work in far north Mozambique when you had to put a message in a bottle to get any sort of communication to the outside world. And now everybody's got mobile phones and they can all access information. That ability to kind of crowdsource people together to solve problems, you can make research happen a lot faster rather than any of us sitting in our kind of ivory towers, right? Many of us got academic backgrounds, right? And that ability to harness the power, because every single smallholder fisher or farmer out there is innovating in their own right. And if you can kind of harness that network, and I think that's what digital tools are making really possible these days. Much of that is really coming from this side of, I'd say the global north, of which Australia is obviously one part of that, right? And I think we have a unique position here with that capacity to really drive that bit forwards, because the human dimension in the Philippines, there's not the same universities, there's not the same sort of tech development type piece that's happening there. It's much more the hands-on actual production and ecosystem engagement that's happening in that part of the world.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to change tune slightly again, David. I'm sorry, again, going back to the kind of this conversation about risks and resilience, and I'm interested when I've spoken certainly a lot about trade-offs this morning, but I'm interested in if aquaculture succeeds at scale, what are some unintended consequences we could or should be looking out for?
If it
If it succeeds at scale, like what are some of the things that we could be, all right, hold on, we're scaling this, what are some of the things that we could be looking out for?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of those questions will be answered as we go. Again, going back to that analogy of not just turning the tap on and having it flow at full speed straight away. There's there's gains that will be made along the way, and I'll use feed as an example here, given that's my specific background. We're constantly innovating where we're going to get the protein to feed our wild fish. 30 years ago, it was simple. It all came from the seas. We were taking fish, growing them up, reconstituting them into a pellet. Now, obviously, there was huge sustainability issues with that. Large El Nino events raised the prices of that fish meal, and all of a sudden, the industry needed to innovate. It needed to innovate so that it could continue to grow and continue to scale. How did it do that? Well, originally, it was about taking protein directly from the mouths of humans. So aquaculture started to compete with human nutrition because it was taking various protein sources and grinding them up and putting them into fish feed. Changes now are that we're tapping into these, I won't use the word byproduct, I'll use the word co-products. So materials that are coming from the circular economy that previously were discarded. They were put into landfill, or they were used as cheap fertilisers. They're being upcycled. They're now being used to create these feeds which are more and more sustainable. They're placing less and less reliance on the marine environment, and they're facilitating that industry to grow.
Awesome, thank you. And I'd be interested in your take on this, if we are going to continue to, what's a better word than exploit? Take it to realise is a better word. Realise the opportunities that the blue economy subset aquaculture, but blue economy has. What are the consequences that growing at scale? And you've mentioned around the working environment in terms of the corridors that we're activity corridors, but what other consequences could we be mindful of?
I think there are two that come to mind straight away. And one is the other users in the marine estate, in particular in the ocean estate, and how do you respect and honour their traditions and their rights and their access? So how do you do that so it's not a divisive wild versus aquaculture kind of conversation? If the wild industry has already been hit by a million other kind of decisions, whether that's another part of my job, which is offshore wind, or other displacements, whether it's rocket launches, whether it's desal plants, whether it's marine protected areas. So I think having that broader marine estate, ocean estate conversation is really important. We're not very good at that in Australia. We get to a point and we freak out because it comes to a point that it feels like you have to choose one industry over another. I think seafood in that context needs to be upped in those conversations more broadly. So I think that...
What do you mean by that? As in it's a high priority
like
because
energy will win, defence will win, just natural, like those sovereign Australian issues will win. And I really think seafood hasn't been really always seen in that food system more broadly. And so being able to look at it as a sovereign food autonomy piece, which comes back to the feed element that was discussed there as well, the ability for us not to rely on importing feed ingredients and having a sovereignty in our feed system and using, as you said, co-products, which I think is a really important piece, changes the game. I think we're also going to start looking at the species. I'm very finfish focused, so I'll talk about it in a finfish context. Right now, you look at species that have a high flesh ratio compared to bone because you were looking at generating, you're paid by the kilo, so you're looking at that kind of piece. But with things like marine byproducts and this kind of co-element, byproducts that might come out of those additional species that might be diversified into the space might mean that the fish that we're currently consuming looks a little bit different because they might not have that high flesh ratio, but they might be offering other sources into our systems, and whether that's nutrients or pharmaceuticals or other elements. But I think get the feed system right. We're very reliant on other countries in that space. I don't know why we're not sitting there at something like this thinking about feed. I would love to see a feed CRC or something in that space. I would love to see us get that right because aquaculture, finfish aquaculture doesn't grow unless the feed part is right. And then marine-based finfish aquaculture doesn't grow unless the ocean space system is right. And so whether that's an evolution of marine spatial planning, But let's just throw into that South Australia right now, harmful algal bloom. So the current spatial planning isn't fit for purpose for resilience and being able to, if I'm a farmer, to be able to pick up my kit and move it from location A to B because I don't have the grids and the moorings, which is a very expensive process. So how do we get more resilient systems, corridors of activity, the systems around it, and if we're producing things, how do we get more out of it? And I think that's the way that would deal with the scalability. I'm also going to throw one other thing in, but finfish, marine-based finfish contribution to Australia's seafood and export composition, you've got 4 companies that are doing it. I think that we can simplify the governance arrangements. I know how to talk to 4 people. I can do it on my phone. I think there's a way of doing this smarter and optimising the spend so that our governance systems are more fit for purpose to get better outcomes. I'm not saying cut corners. I want to be really clear, but I think we can do this better. I think we can be smarter. I think the system we're living in was created for a while ago, and I think where we are right now, it's lagged. I think industry's leading, and I think that lead lag competition, kind of competitiveness, is a healthy thing. But right now, I don't think we're kind of got it all right.
Or isn't healthy?
I think right now, what I would say is not healthy is because every jurisdiction has a growth plan for aquaculture, but none of those growth plans have actually unlocked additional growth. You're seeing optimisation within existing leases and existing sites, or you're seeing mergers and acquisitions. You're not seeing a lot of new, like the SMEs are falling out. You've got boutique and you've got big end of town. And so that system isn't necessarily fit for purpose for supporting the whole lot.
So what's preventing? What's the blockage?
I think that the commercial acumen within political offices and government compared to maybe some of the practical and reality and experiences on industry sort of shifted a little. I think you've got organisations like FRDC and their extension network that have their fingers on all the pie, so you've got some really strong knowledge in pockets. But I think some of those decision makers and those regulatory settings don't quite all talk, and there's a lot of duplication in Australia compared to every other jurisdiction. And I've looked at 10 jurisdictions recently. The whole team have had a look at around the world as to what are those governance arrangements. And Australia's EPBC Act is a beast compared to a lot of those other jurisdictions. And in some ways it tries to be Fisheries and Aquaculture Management Act in addition to an Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act. And that duplication I touched on becomes those barriers. And the only other one I'll add, and then happy to pass on, of course, is headworks. Aquaculture is heavy headworks. It's in a lot of regional areas. And so roads, transport, water, energy needs aren't always fit for purpose. And so you might be looking at a particular build and you've got to put 50 mil on top of straight away so you don't have brownouts, because you don't want the rest of the community to not be able to have power because you've sucked it all in for something. So the decarbonisation agenda, I think, is a really important piece, because it's not just about sustainability credentials, it's about doing more with what you've got, being smarter with it. And so there's a bit of a systematic approach there.
Brilliant. Thank you. I want to keep going on that thread, but I'm going to jump because I do want to cover a couple of topics. I might come back, and I'm quite interested in our societal understanding of the blue economy, of what's possible with aquaculture, and whether this kind of us seeing aquaculture as part of food or broader economic activity, and to your point around it coming as a lower priority from defence and energy, whether that's an aquaculture thing or a food not as a human right thing. That interests me. Anyway, but we're going to jump, because Michael, I want to come to you. And it's kind of a little bit linked, but how do we innovate without destabilising people and industries already invested in existing systems? So it speaks to your point around systems, but it's like, how do we, maybe it's a change management question, and I'd be interested, I know that from what I know of you, you walk in a couple of different worlds, and sometimes change in a cultural context as well can be, as a guttier, as a white person, I don't understand it as nearly as well as you would.
It's pretty simple. Like I said earlier, who are we doing it for? When you're fishing and you're doing finfish or whatever, it's all getting exported. That is the motivator, and that's what actually harms us more than anything. One thing about the ocean and the blue economy, there's always trade-offs. So I'll give a classic example of why I did what I did when I did it, in regards to my company, Tidal Moon. In 2011, 2012, there was a massive heat wave in Shark Bay. You had scientists from everywhere talking about, the seagrass loss, which was about 22%. All this carbon got released into the air. But if you shifted just 3 steps to the left, you could see a symbiotic relationship being emerged in front of your eyes. And that's the observations that Indigenous people do. We look at the whole landscape. We see everything entangled. So if you want to fish something over here, be prepared for the trade-off over here. If you want to do aquaculture here, be prepared for the loss over here. That symbiotic relationship that we saw was that the sea cucumbers increased in size. Why did it do it? Whatever the reason is, we know it's a mechanism that nature has provided us to say, okay, let's look at this further and let's do a deep dive on how we can make our systems, our environment, and our culture stronger based on a commodity. So now I'm using that commodity to fix up my seagrass in Shark Bay and creating a true circular economy where I sell to the market and also pivoting the market. I don't want to sell to China. I don't want to sell to the East too much. I want to sell to Australians. I want to make sure that the benefits of what sea cucumbers can actually bring, which is all the ladies in the house, it's really high in collagen. It makes you look really good. I tell a joke, I'm 65. I got one good laugh. But yeah, there are some, like, the ocean can provide a lot, not just food. It can provide a lot of biomedical properties. The biggest challenge I had was that there was a monopoly. And the monopoly went from the South Australian border all the way up to the NT border. Now that size is 3 times the size of Texas. And one company owned it. That one company, why are they doing it? They're selling to China. So for me to get that equality of access and pivot the market and go, okay, I'm going to create, ladies again, collagen cream, make you look younger, and also biomedical stuff and pivot towards the West, you're creating a covenant then with the market saying, if you buy our product, we'll restore seagrass. And you're looking at those people in the audience, and if you do care about the ocean, put your hands up. If you buy it, you know your dollar is going to a good cause. It's not just going up to somewhere, internationally. It's staying in Australia, it's staying home. So the original question, always look at the trade-offs. Because no matter what we do in the ocean, we can't control it. Nature's always smarter than what we think. And you have to have your eyes wide open, otherwise you can do more damage. So sometimes you have to sit before you come in the idea and just pick out what actually the consequences are before we have to go back and go, okay, we need to go back down this road again.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks, Michael. I'm interested, and again, Nick, you've worked in a number of different locations, and I'm interested. And maybe this is a bit of a misnomer, but like, who needs to be in the room when we talk about the future of blue economy and who often misses out? Like, I think it's, to Michael's point, there's a monopoly. You're talking about fishing licenses, Michael? Yes.
Yeah. There's 6 licenses in Australia, Western Australia, and one company owns all 6.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
So when we're then talking about how we do the planning, the marine spatial planning, the top 4 you talked about, there seems to be some significant players. I don't want to say monopolies, but some significant players. And I'm interested in, if we are going to have this, what was the word leverage this opportunity that we've got with the blue economy and what's possible within our oceans, who often misses out, or who do we need to be yarning with to ensure that we're creating a really, in the context of the fragility, but in the context of Michael's point around equity, having an equitable future for our oceans.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think the answer is really simple. It's the smallholders, right? It's the local communities, whether they be Indigenous communities, local communities, who have that knowledge, that the traditional ecological knowledge that you were just talking about this relationship between, in fact, the larger sea cucumber sizes and the status of the seagrass beds. They often miss out. They're very rarely given a seat at the table, and that's partly because it's hard. There's millions of smallholder producers out there, so you can't give everybody a seat at the table. So then there's a need to and I think this is something that Australia is kind of very much further advanced on compared to some other countries in terms of getting that representation. Not perfect by any means yet, but at least it's a conversation. It's not a conversation in every jurisdiction. So I think that's the biggest one, and it really needs to be grounded in what is this local ecological knowledge, this traditional ecological knowledge, whatever we want to call it, depending on the context of where it is. You know, this is the knowledge that can get us out of trouble when things start to happen really fast and really, you know, these changes are happening in the ocean space at a much faster rate than any living people can remember, right? But there's knowledge there in those traditional systems. And I've not had the opportunity to work in Australia, which has obviously got the longest bed of knowledge, I would say, out there, right? So that sounds like a fascinating opportunity, and that it must include times where there has been really rapid change. But one thing that's really important when you do that as well is making sure you don't exploit that knowledge. And I'm sure that's a big conversation here. But you can use tech to aggregate information and help share it, but how do you make sure the ownership stays with the people where it comes from?
Yep, and I think it kind of links back to your point before around the opportunity that technology can, in terms of information gathering, communication, because I think it's, you know, nothing about us without us. And it's, I think, that two-way information. It can't be having, so I live in the Kimberley, and it's the Kimberley mob are some of the most researched people in Australia. And, you know, if I look some of the social metrics that happen in my communities, we are some of the most poverty stricken. And having worked with smallholders in Papua New Guinea, I know the same thing. Like, and it has to be like I hear from I can see from a blue economy's perspective, that kind of, that sharing is so critical.
And I think a lot of local ecological knowledge, at least from the systems I've worked with, that there's a traditional way that is developed, right, over time. And actually the rate of change that's happening in the ecosystems at the moment is really stressing those traditional systems. This is where technology can play a really important part. But to Michael's point, if everything is owned by people who aren't connected to that environment, then we're going to start to lose that knowledge, but also that adaptability and that resilience.
Yep. Beautiful. David, I'm going to throw to you for the next question, and I've got to see how much time we got. What signals should we be watching for in the next 5 years that is going to tell us we're heading in the right direction from your area of expertise, or generally in the blue economy? So what should we be looking for that we can kind of go, oh, yep, we're heading in the right direction?
I think growth
Growth?
is always going to be the number one.
But growth for growth's sake?
No, definitely not. Growth for the sake of food security, I think, would be the way to frame that.
Yep.
The industry is putting those mechanisms in place to expand. What would be nice to see is that, going back to one of the previous comments around, you know, the 4 big businesses that are largely responsible for aquaculture production in Australia at the moment, it would be good to see some diversification coming through. I think we're starting to see that. We've got new species which are hitting the market, Murray cod being one of those. Innovative technology, keeping it nice and simple, but we're starting to see growth across the portfolio of different species. So I think that's one. Where I really see us getting, you know, the indicators that we're on the right track is that improvement in social licence, and that's probably, you know, one of the biggest challenges that we're currently facing at the moment, is that the general public largely is either not adequately educated with regard to what aquaculture does, or has been misfed information to the point where they're looking at the industry as a really negative thing, which is certainly not the case. You know, the industry there is there to put food on plates.
Oh, I could open the social licence can of worms, but I'm not, or tin fish, I should say. I won't. Don't look at that. No, don't go to social licence. Okay, I'm going to change tack slightly then, but we could go there as a response. I'm going to, I'll give you 30 seconds each to respond to this. What's a blue economy? It's a very broad question. You can take it where you want. What's a blue economy idea or thing that you've seen that you hope doesn't happen? Doesn't.
Oh, shit. Doesn't. I'm always on the do's. Can someone else start?
Yeah. So what's something that we've seen developing, like, oh, Jiminy Crickets, if we go down this avenue, and you could say, oh, look, you can flip it if you want. What does happen?
Can I do a does?
Absolutely, mate.
Because I really like that last question. Because I actually think it's going to be like when you go to your supermarkets and you're looking at what's in the frozen section, and there is more Australian frozen fish that's where I think aquaculture and seafood and what we've done wins, because right now 64% of seafood consumed in Australia is imported. And in the finfish context, 73%, and I'll need to check that because it changes every now and again, the finfish produced in Australia is consumed in Australia. And if you follow those flows of activity, they end up in those capital cities. I'm conscious of the 30 seconds. But I think the measure would be when you're looking at Coles or Woolies or whoever, and you're looking at IGA, whatever you've got, and you're looking at those instead of the imported white flesh, battered whatevs, that instead it is Australian farmed seafood, whether it's marine or land-based. If that's there, we've won. And if that 64 drops and we get to 50-50, that's kind of our little logo, 50-50 only fair. We do not want to be the US where 90% of seafood is imported and 10%, because as we touched on, we've got this big ocean space, it's a dormant asset. We've got to get our shit together and we've got to do this properly, whether it's wild or aquaculture, and our growth and prosperity goes hand in hand for both of those industries.
Brilliant. Thank you. Michael?
What was the question?
Yeah, okay. So, well,
Not the one I answered.
not the one that Ange answered, exactly. So I'll reframe it. So if, what's the thing, actually, I'll ask this question instead. If we're truly being brave, what do we need to do right now? So it's kind of a different take on the way that Ange just responded to that question. So if we're being truly brave to unlock to keep in mind this dormant asset, as Ange put it, this opportunity that presents us within our oceans, acknowledging that, someone made the comment before, or that I hope we've learned some lessons with what happened with the Green Revolution. So what is it, if we're truly being brave, what could we do now in the context of our fragile dormant estate, but our opportunistic dormant estate in the blue economy, aquaculture?
Well, it's a good question. It's easy for me to answer because I'm actually doing it. But at the same time, above everything is we got to support each other. There's a lot of competition when you talk about the blue economy. And sometimes you'll see a business and you go, you shouldn't be doing that, but we'll let them go and fail, but it will harm all of us. That's the worst thing about this emerging blue economy is okay, they're going down the wrong path, but no one says anything. But it hurts us all. We live on an island. And once you start messing up one part of the ocean, it just doesn't work. The classic example is no one takes in sound pollution at all. Sound dominates underwater. Seagrass makes a lot of sound. Once it's wiped away, that sound actually has an impact. It's those small things. When you introduce our human behaviors into the ocean, there's an effect. And as humans, we don't sit back and go, hey, look, you shouldn't be doing that. We let them go to fail and let them learn on their own path, but they don't realize we all fail. So I think a lot of more networking, conferences like these here actually get those tough questions out. And if you take something away today, I'd say that don't just sit back and watch. Actually tell people. There's no harm in telling people if you're doing the wrong thing. We'll all benefit in the end because, again, who are we doing it for? I'm doing it for the next generation. When I'm gone and my pinnacle's here, I want someone to come along and beat it and do more than me. That's my purpose. That's my goal. Carry the risk for as long as I can, but I want someone to beat me.
Yep.
And then eventually I believe someone will.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Michael. Nick?
I'd say give the governance back to the local players, to the smallholder players. I think one of the things you see in the Philippines, which I think is really forward thinking, is that within 15 kilometers shore is protected for municipal fishers. So local people within that, within those communities, have the right to manage and make decisions over what happens within that 15 kilometers of shore. I think that there's problems with the implementation, but the idea in the Philippines, but the idea is a really strong one. So I think giving back governance to and encouraging stewardship, enabling that stewardship to happen.
Beautiful. Final word.
The one that resonates with me simply comes back to communication. I feel as a national industry, aquaculture doesn't communicate enough within itself. We see it in Norway. There's a lot of knowledge sharing the trials and tribulations, learning from each other's mistakes. In my experience, there's a lot of reinventing of wheels, and I think that's completely unnecessary, and it's actually hampering development. I'd like to see a much more inclusive, much more open sharing environment. I think that would really help the industry to move forward in strides.
Fantastic. Huge round of applause for our panel. talking tales of risk, resilience and innovation. And now I want one final huge round of applause for Ange, whose birthday it is today. So happy birthday, Ange! Beautiful. Thank you all very much. And thank you to our diehard fish folk who are in the audience. Thank you for flying the flag. Thank you very much. And we'll see you back, I think back in the plenary next. Enjoy.